Good to have you with us here. We're going to begin straight away at the White House. President Trump left a short while ago. He has some fundraisers in eastern Long Island, but before he departed, he spoke to reporters about a number of subjects, including China, but mainly guns and what he believes is possible on background check legislation.
Hardline senators, hardline, and when I say that in a positive way, hardline on the Second Amendment. And they understand we don't want insane people, mentally ill people, bad people, dangerous people. We don't want guns in the hands of the wrong people. I think that the Republicans are going to be great and lead the charge along with the Democrats. I spoke yesterday to Nancy Pelosi. We had a great talk. I spoke to Chuck Schumer. We had a great talk. There's been no president that feels more strongly about the Second Amendment than I do. However, we need meaningful background checks so that sick people don't get guns.
President Trump at the White House just moments ago, and so let's stay there with ABC's Jordan Phelps, who covers for us. Jordan, does the president's remarks there, does that move the ball forward at all on legislation?
Well, what did move the ball forward was Mitch McConnell yesterday saying to one of our radio affiliates that he does intend to follow the president's lead and to move for legislation in September. So that's the real political move there in terms of making this move forward. But what's significant here is the president continues to express this strong support for making progress on background checks. The president was asked what's different this time. Aaron, as you know well, the president has called for bold measures before and it's come to nothing. He said he thinks that this is a unique moment. He thinks that he has not changed, but the moment has, and that he has more influence in the party and that Republicans are more ready to move on this issue.
And even if they do move, what they're proposing, Jordan, is rather modest, significant in that anything would be done legislatively after a mass shooting, but the background checks by themselves are a rather modest proposal.
Absolutely. He also talked about red flag laws. Those are laws that would allow authorities to take guns away from people who are shown to pose a threat to themselves or others. But what we're talking about here is potentially something like the Manchin-Toomey bill, which is very limited and looks at closing loopholes for gun purchases so that background checks are applied to gun shows and to online sales where they aren't currently. So that's obviously a very tiny fix. But Aaron, even something like that was unable to get passed back in 2013 and has been, dead ever since. So it's something that is small, but it's significant because we haven't been able to get even that far so far.
Jordan, while we have you, I want to ask you, too, about some of the president's remarks on China, because the trade war has been moving markets this week. President said, we'll see what happens, as he often does.
Yeah, but the president also took kind of an optimistic tone, as he always does, saying that the United States is in a very strong position and that China is in a weak position. The president, is basically playing a big game of chicken here, Aaron, as you know he has been. And he said that he might even have to cancel those planned negotiations with China in early September, that the United States is not satisfied with what China is offering right now. And so he's really pushing ahead with this, but very much confident in where things are right now.
ABC's Jordan Phelps, live from the White House. Jordan, our thanks to you. I want to bring in ABC News law enforcement contributor Jon Cohen, formerly of the Department of Homeland Security, to talk a little bit more about the end of this incredible week and an incredibly difficult week. John, let's start with what the president was talking about, background checks and red flag laws. How important are these pieces of potential legislation?
Well, they're important. They're not the magic solution, but putting in place not only the laws, but the information sharing and other operational capabilities that allow us to prevent people who represent a danger to themselves or to others from acquiring or possessing firearms are important. And as for red flag laws, this is a process in which law enforcement and mental health professionals work with the courts that when somebody is identified as a danger to the community, their access to firearms, their ability to buy firearms can be temporarily restricted. So these are an important part of the toolbox potentially that can help local communities prevent these types of attacks. But these steps in and of themselves will not stop massacres and horrific tragedies like the ones we've just experienced in El Paso and Dayton.
Now, you've been preaching for a long time the need to go beyond the criminal law element here to do a little bit more. And we learned that there might have been some flags, at least in Dayton, and lists that he may have made in high school that either were or were not heeded. And whether that was predictive of anything, police weren't sure. But what have we learned based on the last couple of mass shootings that might be useful going forward?
Well, Aaron, over the past 4 or 5 years, there's been a lot of work done by the FBI, law enforcement, the mental health community, educators, faith leaders, and we have a pretty good understanding of the behavioral characteristics of the people who are committing these types of attacks. And we also have a pretty good understanding of the types of behaviors they're going to exhibit prior to going into a location and shooting people. So the challenge is that we have to educate the public so that when they see the warning signs, they pick up the phone and they call local authorities. But as the case that you just described illustrates, it's not just having somebody seeing something and saying something. It's training those people taking the call, taking in that information, to ask the right questions, to begin acquiring the right information so that it can be used to assess whether a person who's exhibiting this behavior poses a risk. And if they do pose a risk, those local communities need to have the resources in place to take steps to prevent an attack from occurring. If there's any good news, is that there are a growing number of local jurisdictions who have made putting those types of capabilities in place a priority. And there are examples, a growing number of examples, where potential attacks were stopped because of the efforts of the local community and local authorities.
There's certainly a great deal of awareness, especially at the end of this tough week. And we just had a fresh example of how on edge the country is. In Springfield, Missouri, a 20-year-old dressed like G.I. Joe walked into a Walmart, and a retired firefighter ended up subduing him. No shots fired. Police were eventually able to go in there and arrest him based on a charge of making a terrorist threat. But what does this tell us about the state of affairs in this country, John?
I think people are scared. I mean, we see the reports of people reacting to backfires from motorcycles and fleeing. A neighborhood in New York, we hear people, in shopping malls or other places, hearing loud sounds and fleeing. People are scared, but I think what it also reflects is that people do not have confidence that our government is doing enough to protect them. And when people believe that they're not safe when they go to the mall, when they go to a store to prepare for school, to go to a house of worship and pray, when they don't feel that they're safe, then I think government is really dropping the ball in doing what it should be doing in order to protect the public.
John, is that skepticism of the government effort warranted? We've seen the Department of Homeland Security, your former agency, just this week focused a lot on border issues and immigration, which they continue to call a humanitarian crisis. We had the largest ever immigration raids in Mississippi. How is the agency balancing these two priorities?
Yeah, Aaron, that's a great question. I think what happened this week is actually a good illustration of the challenge facing the Department of Homeland Security and, quite frankly, the challenge facing this administration more broadly. For 2.5, 3 years, we have heard from this administration through their rhetoric that the primary threat facing the United States today comes from people who are seeking to immigrate here, whether legally or illegally. They have not just focused their rhetoric on that issue, but they've focused their resources. So funding and other resources that could have been applied to dealing with threats like domestic terrorism were reduced, and instead focused on issues associated with immigration enforcement and border security. I mean, it's perplexing to me as somebody who is one of the top leaders at the Department of Homeland Security that on the same week or in the week following 2 mass shootings by individuals who are potentially inspired by extremist ideology, that we would do a workplace enforcement rate of this magnitude. Workplace enforcement by its very nature is going after low-risk people. These are people who are here in this country, they are working, they are probably paying taxes, they're contributing to their communities, and they're typically not criminals. So we are taking limited enforcement resources from ICE. We are applying them to go after people who essentially pose no risk. And to me, particularly in the week after El Paso and Dayton, at a time period where the Department of Homeland Security has been raising real concerns that they do not have enough resources to deal with the increase of people at the southern border, at a time where we have far more important threats. For the department to carry out a raid of this magnitude at this time is a best tone deaf, but probably represents poor judgment from an operational decision-making perspective.
Jon Cohen, formerly of the Department of Homeland Security, now an ABC News contributor on these law enforcement matters. And John, in fact, we put some of these questions about the ICE immigration enforcement action in Mississippi to the acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Here's ABC's Will Carr.
Aaron, we really wanted to talk to the acting secretary about those ICE raids in Mississippi that arrested more than 600 people and separated families. We also talked to him about a number of issues impacting the border. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Do you know how many children were separated from their families?
So ICE does a case-by-case assessment with everyone they arrest. They've already released about 40% of the people they arrested yesterday. And those parents that had dependent care issues were prioritized for release. They're placed back where they were apprehended so they can connect with their children.
So we want to show you a quick video.
My dad didn't do nothing. He's not a criminal.
What would you say to that little girl?
Yeah, obviously the impact of enforcement of law can be devastating for families. And so what I would say is that ICE is going to go through a case-by-case process. If she needs that parent for care tonight, they're probably already released. But it is really a challenging situation. We've got very vulnerable laws that invite families and kids to make this dangerous journey right now. The kids are put at risk from the beginning of the cycle through their arrival in the U.S.
And what happens to the kids when the parents are taken into custody?
So obviously it depends on the individual situation. As I already noted, from the arrest yesterday, about 40% have already been released that had either already been encountered, that didn't have a criminal record, or weren't a mandatory detention requirement under federal law. And of course, if they have a dependent care issue, that's prioritized for release.
And for the first time, we were taken inside what's called a soft-sided holding facility. On the inside, it was clean. There was air conditioning. We saw 18 showers for both the men and the women. It was packed with food. We saw migrant families lying on the ground. They were on mats and they were wrapped in those silver Mylar blankets. They had televisions playing for the kids. Some of the kids looked happy. Some looked nervous. Some looked confused. I saw one man actually cradling his baby, rocking that baby back and forth. His knee was bouncing up and down. He was clearly nervous as he was going through the process. But this is a stark contrast to many of those images that we saw last month, especially from the Inspector General's report that showed pictures of jam-packed detention centers in Texas. That report actually called one facility in Texas a ticking time bomb. I asked the acting secretary if those facilities have gotten better. He tells me he was just in Texas and those facilities have gotten a lot better. They have all dropped below capacity in large part due to soft-sided facilities like they have here in Yuma. Aaron.
ABC's Will Carr in Arizona. Our thanks to you. Immigration has been a topic on the campaign trail, certainly, and we heard new rhetoric from Julian Castro, one of the many Democratic candidates stumping at the Iowa State Fair this weekend. ABC's Adam Kelsey is there. Bring us up to speed, Adam, on what these candidates are saying.
Yeah, that's right, Aaron. It was former Secretary Julian Castro, the first up on the political soapbox here on day 2 of the Iowa State Fair. And what we heard from Castro was a lot of talk about immigration, as you mentioned, which has become the issue on which he's become known in this wide field of presidential candidates, sharing with Iowa voters, again, his idea to decriminalize border crossings. Now, he still says that he wants to make sure that folks who are crossing the southern border from Mexico into the United States are still held accountable for those actions, but that they can be tried through the civil court process, that this doesn't need to be something that they need to be criminally detained for, held in those centers that Will was just talking about earlier here on the show. And for Castro, he got a positive reception here at the State Fair, but he's going to need a little bit more than that if he wants to remain part of the conversation about top-tier candidates in this race. He's somebody who entered the race way back when, around New Year's, so one of the first candidates to jump in. He's been polling in the 1% to 2% area ever since then. Had some breakout moments when he was talking about that issue of immigration during the first two presidential debates. But in trying to remain part of the conversation today, he's releasing a new plan on gun control and on addressing white supremacy. Obviously, the issues that we've been talking about since the shootings this past weekend down in El Paso, Texas, his home state. Part of this gun control program that Castro is rolling out, saying that when he becomes president of the United States, he would take immediate executive action to ban high-capacity magazines, to ban assault weapons, to end some of the loopholes that allow people to purchase guns even though they might be on FBI lists. Certainly universal background checks, something that we've heard from all of the Democratic presidential candidates, and something that we heard from Senator Cory Booker, a gun licensing program. Castro, like Booker, explaining that if you need a license to drive an automobile, you should need a license as well to own a firearm.
Adam, I wanted to ask you about voter reception. How are these proposals being received, and how are the candidates themselves being received by voters on the ground there at the Iowa State Fair? Joe Biden still riding high at the top of the polls.
You know, when it comes to news of day, Aaron, things like gun control, a lot of the Democrats I've been talking to here, all in agreement on things like universal background checks. But when it comes to their favorite candidates, the folks that they are thinking that if the election was tomorrow, they would be voting for, Joe Biden continues to be the top name that we're hearing. And that's something that we hear not just here in Iowa, but across the country. When it comes down to this wide field of candidates and who they would be punching the ballot for, it's the person that they think would be most electable. And we talked with somebody yesterday afternoon who did a pretty good job summarizing that position, said that she used to consider herself fairly liberal, but the most important thing to her is defeating Donald Trump. Take a listen.
When you think about who's electable and who can get things done and who's moderate, he's the one who stands out for me. He's got a lot of baggage, and I worry about that. But as I'm a registered Democrat, but I worry about some of the really liberal candidates like Elizabeth Warren. I try to put a hat on that says, okay, I say I'm a middle America voter, and I hear Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders talk, and I think that's exactly what's not going to get elected. That is like catnip for the Republicans. So that's why I like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, because they can sort of get things done. I think the electability part of things has to do with their policies. I don't think you can decriminalize immigration. I don't think you can have health care for all. I don't think you can forgive all student loans. I've always considered myself very liberal, and when I hear those things, even I start to say, whoa.
So many of these voters may be in favor of Medicare for all, free college tuition, but they're not just thinking about themselves. They're thinking about what's going to go over well in some of these blue-collar communities that President Trump carried back in 2016, and they seem to think that Joe Biden's the best person to defeat the president.
All right, Adam, stay with us for more of Adam's reporting from the Iowa State Fair. Check him out online, too, for his snack intake and all the delicious treats. We're going to turn next, though, to Central America, because the president of Honduras has just been implicated in a drug trafficking scandal, a case that's being prosecuted here in New York. And we're going to speak first with Jeff Ernst, a freelance journalist on the ground in Honduras. He's been following all this. What happened, Jeff?
Well, on Saturday reported that a document released by the U.S. District Court of New York that's related to the trial of the president's brother, Tony Hernandez, who's facing charges for drug trafficking and related weapons charges. The document stated that the president of Honduras, and it didn't list him specifically, but it listed as co-conspirator quad 4, and the information obtained in the document made it very clear who that person is, indicating, for example, that that person won the presidency in 2013. So this document outlines a series of accusations made by the prosecutors that the president of Honduras received and solicited bribes from and illicit campaign financing from narco traffickers working in the country and in conjunction with his brother.
So, Jeff, while he is an unindicted co-conspirator, according to prosecutors here in New York, it's still not a great look. What's been the reaction?
reaction has been tremendous. Many in Honduras, this confirms what's been rumored for a long time. Just 2 months ago, another document related to the trial came out that listed the president, his sister, and other top ministers as targets of a DEA investigation since 2013. And then for now, this document to come out, which goes further, listing him as a co-conspirator in this corruption conspiracy to traffic drugs through Honduras and to the United States. It's very significant, and it's resulted in renewed protests and calls for the ouster of the president.
All right, Jeff Ernst on the ground in Honduras, a freelance journalist, talking about Juan Orlando Hernandez, the president of Honduras, who denies the allegations. But we're joined now by our own producer here at ABC News, Victoria Ramirez, who spent some time recently in Honduras. This has gotten to the point, though, where the government is really trying to control the message in telling politicians, don't go against the president on this one.
It's not only politicians, they're also telling public employees, government employees. In some of the conversations I've had over the last few days, I was told by some public employees that they were put on notice on Monday. You cannot bash the party, you cannot bash the president. Consider yourself lucky and blessed was the word they used, that you have a job, because there's a lot of unemployed people here in Honduras.
And all of this has sent protesters into the streets.
Yes, there's been ongoing protests against Juan Orlando Hernandez and this whole debacle throughout the week. They're being encouraged by ousted President Mel Zelaya, and they're going to continue today. The people are definitely fired up, and they're being pretty relentless.
What does it mean on the ground to have your president implicated in a drug conspiracy that's being charged in the United States that involves the president's brother? It's a bit of a mess.
It's a mess, but it's a mess that they're not surprised by. When I was on the ground, people were telling me, if his brother is dirty, he's probably dirty too. For the record, Juan Orlando Hernandez has denied, he has said he is categorically denies all the allegations, but it's just not a good look, especially since it's not the first time that his presidential campaigns are involved with corruption and bad donations.
We know you'll be following it for us. Victoria Ramirez from ABC News on the latest out of Honduras. And now for something completely different, as they say. Taco Bell has a hotel in Palm Springs, California, and ABC's Romina Puga is there because Taco Bell has a hotel, pretty much. Romina, how is it?
Aaron, be jealous. We're here at the Taco Bell Hotel. I'm already Taco Belled out with this hot sauce flower hair thing. Also, I got a fanny pack full of hot sauce ready to sauce anyone at any time. Let's show you around because this is one of the most anticipated events of the year. Tickets sold out in 2 minutes. This is the main hub, this pool area with hot sauce packet floaties. There's a stage where they had DJs and live performances. People came from 21 different states. But of course, it's not a Taco Bell hotel without some food, right? So they have some elevated Taco Bell exclusive meals for the people here, like a club sandwich, but the bread is chalupa bread. And if you don't know what a chalupa is, you shouldn't be here. In about an hour, everyone's getting room service to their rooms with make your own tacos. We have some of the items here, like an avocado toast by Taco Bell with Diablo chips in it. And this is chilaquiles with some chips that are so spicy. They killed me yesterday. This is an horchata like smoothie they have, some OJ. I've basically eaten enough to last me through the end of the year. Aaron?
And people are taking this quite seriously. Did I hear some couple celebrated an engagement or got married or an anniversary? What?
A honeymoon. So this whole event is for the diehards. I mean, everything here is an Instagram opportunity. So a lot of the people here are Instagrammers. At the pool, people are just taking pictures of each other. But there is a couple here that are diehard Taco Bell fans. They got married at the Taco Bell Cantina in Vegas a couple weeks ago. They're celebrating their honeymoon here, and they love Taco Bell so much. Their wedding bands are Taco Bell themed. And they had this to say about how much they love Taco Bell.
It's chalupa?
I like chalupa.
Chalupa? I think chalupa's going to be our first pick.
Yeah.
That's what they would name their child, chalupa. I mean, I love Taco Bell, but not that much. Aaron?
Romina, thanks. Good luck to you. Good luck to your stomach. Good luck to those people with the kid at the Taco Bell Hotel in Palm Springs. for all of this, you got to stay with us here on ABC News Live. For that, for some other things, the briefing room at 3:30 Eastern Time, followed by World News Tonight with David Muir, 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And you can always download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for being with us here on The Debrief. I'm Aaron Katersky in New York. You're watching ABC News Live.